Have you ever been in a situation where someone was being mean for no reason? What would you do if you saw someone bullying a family just trying to enjoy their day? Welcome, viewers. Today we're diving into a powerful story filled with unexpected twists, strong emotions, and a lesson about courage and kindness. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Now let's get into the story. It was a bright, sunny afternoon at the Greenfield Park. The air was warm, the birds were singing, and families were out, enjoying a perfect day. Children were running around, laughing, playing games, and their cheerful voices filled the park with a sense of joy. Among them was a family of four: Maya, Sam, and their two children, Leo and Leela. They had come to the park for a picnic, with a big blanket spread out, a basket full of snacks, and board games to play. It was a day meant for fun, smiles, and making happy memories. Maya and Sam watched their kids run around, their faces beaming with joy. Leo was showing off his cartwheels, while Leela was blowing bubbles, chasing them as they floated away. The family was lost in their little world of fun, not knowing that their peaceful afternoon was about to take a sharp, unpleasant turn. From across the park, Miss Karen, a middle-aged woman, noticed the family. She was sitting alone on a bench, sipping her coffee, and she didn't look happy. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the children playing and laughing. To most people, their happiness would have been infectious, but to Miss Karen, it was like a thorn. She huffed and muttered under her breath, "Why are they so loud? Why can't they just be quiet?" Miss Karen was known around town for her short temper and her habit of making scenes over the smallest things. She always thought she was right, and she didn't care who she had to insult or shout at to prove her point. Today, she decided that she had enough of this happy, noisy family. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and marched over to the picnic blanket, her face twisted into a frown. "Hey," she shouted, startling Maya and Sam. "Can't you keep it down? Some of us are trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon." Maya was taken aback for a moment. She looked up, confused, and then smiled politely. "Oh, I'm sorry. The kids were just playing. We didn't mean to disturb you." But Miss Karen was not satisfied. "Playing? It sounds like a circus over here. Can't you control your children?" Her voice was sharp, and people around the park started to turn their heads, wondering what was going on. Sam stood up, his expression calm but firm. He didn't like the way this stranger was talking to his family, but he didn't want to make things worse. "Ma'am, they're just kids. They're playing like everyone else here. There's no need to be rude." Miss Karen's eyes flashed with anger. She crossed her arms and stepped closer, trying to intimidate Sam. "Rude? I'll tell you what's rude. Letting your kids run wild and ruin other people's peace. If you can't control them, maybe you shouldn't bring them to the park at all." The tension in the air was thick. Leo and Leela, who had stopped playing, ran back to their parents, looking scared and confused. They didn't understand why this lady was yelling at them. Maya wrapped her arms around them, trying to reassure them, even though she herself felt nervous. They were just trying to have a nice day, and now this woman was making them feel like they had done something wrong. By now, a small crowd had started to gather around. People whispered, some looking at Miss Karen with disapproval, others just curious to see what would happen next. But no one seemed ready to step in and stop her. It was like they were all frozen, watching the scene unfold. Miss Karen's voice got louder, and her words got meaner. She began pointing her finger at Maya and Sam, blaming them for everything wrong she could think of. "This is what's wrong with people these days. No respect, no manners, just doing whatever they want. It's disgraceful," she snapped. Maya tried to stay calm, but it was hard. Her hands trembled as she held on to her kids, trying to protect them from this stranger's harsh words. Sam clenched his fists, fighting the urge to shout back. He knew if he did, it would only make things worse, but he couldn't just let this woman bully them. Miss Karen's face was red with fury, and she seemed to be enjoying the attention. She thought she had everyone on her side. But then something happened that she didn't expect. A young woman named Jenna, who had been watching from a distance, decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped forward, her heart pounding but her eyes steady. "Hey, leave them alone," Jenna said, her voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "They haven't done anything wrong." The park fell silent. Everyone, including Miss Karen, turned to look at Jenna. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Miss Karen's mouth dropped open, shocked that someone had dared to challenge her. "What did you say?" she hissed, glaring at Jenna. Jenna didn't back down. "You heard me. They're just a family having fun. You're the one being rude." The tension rose again, but this time, it felt different. People began to shift, some nodding in agreement with Jenna. The balance was starting to change, and Miss Karen was losing control of the situation. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger, unexpected twist. As the conflict between Miss Karen and the family intensified, the atmosphere in the park grew tense. People who had been enjoying their own picnics, walks, and games began to notice the commotion. Some stopped what they were doing, gathering quietly in the background, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion, concern, and curiosity. No one was sure how to react. It was as if they were watching a scene from a movie, unsure whether to intervene or just let it play out. Maya's hands were still trembling slightly as she hugged her children close, trying to shield them from the harsh words. She whispered to them, "It's okay, kids. Just stay close to Mommy." Leo and Leela, who had been so carefree moments before, now clung to their mother, their eyes wide with confusion. They didn't understand why this stranger was being so mean, and it made them feel small and scared. Sam, meanwhile, was doing his best to stay calm, but he could feel the anger boiling inside him. He had always taught his kids to be polite and kind to others, and now this woman was shouting at his family as if they had done something terribly wrong. He wanted to shout back, to defend his family, but he knew it wouldn't solve anything. So he took a deep breath and tried again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "I understand you want some peace and quiet, but my kids are just playing. We're not trying to bother anyone." Miss Karen's face twisted into a sneer. She took a step closer, her voice growing louder and more pointed. "You think I care about your excuses? This is what's wrong with people like you. No respect, no manners, just taking up space and acting like you own the place." Sam's jaw tightened. He had never felt so angry and powerless at the same time. He glanced at Maya, and she met his eyes, giving him a silent message. "Stay calm. We'll get through this." But Miss Karen wasn't finished yet. She turned her attention to Maya, noticing her attempt to calm her children. "Look at you, teaching your kids to be just as rude as you are. Can't you see they're bothering everyone here?" she shouted, her voice echoing across the park. By now, a few people had pulled out their phones, quietly recording the scene. Some whispered to each other, while others just watched, their expressions showing sympathy for the family and disbelief at Miss Karen's behavior. It was as if the whole park was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Suddenly, out of the crowd, a voice spoke up. "Hey, leave them alone." The words cut through the tense silence like a knife. Everyone, including Miss Karen, turned to see who had spoken. It was Jenna, a young woman who had been sitting on a bench nearby, quietly watching the whole situation unfold. She had hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should get involved, but when she saw the scared look on the kids' faces, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Miss Karen's eyes narrowed, glaring at Jenna. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice low and threatening. Jenna stepped forward, her heart pounding, but she didn't back down. "I said leave them alone. They're not doing anything wrong. You're the one being rude." For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The park was completely silent, and all eyes were on Jenna. Even Miss Karen seemed stunned, as if she couldn't believe someone had dared to stand up to her. But her shock quickly turned into anger. "Oh, so now you're going to lecture me, huh?" Miss Karen snapped, her face flushing red. "Why don't you mind your own business?" "This is my business," Jenna replied, her voice clear and unwavering. "When I see someone bullying others, it's my business. These kids are just trying to enjoy their day, and you're ruining it for no reason." Jenna's words seemed to shift something in the crowd. A few people nodded in agreement, and someone even murmured, "Yeah, she's right." It was as if a spark had been lit, and the mood in the park began to change. Miss Karen looked around, realizing that not everyone was on her side anymore. For the first time, she seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to do. But she wasn't ready to back down just yet. "They need to learn some respect," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just telling them the truth." "No, you're not," Jenna said firmly. "Respect isn't about making other people feel small. It's about treating everyone with kindness. And right now, you're the one who's being disrespectful." Sam and Maya exchanged a look of relief and gratitude. For the first time since the confrontation had started, they felt like they weren't alone. Jenna had given them a lifeline, and they were grateful to her for stepping in when no one else would. The crowd began to shift, a few more people stepping closer to Jenna's side. Miss Karen glanced around, noticing how the mood had changed, and she looked nervous. The power she had felt earlier, when she was shouting at the family, was slipping away. She had thought everyone would agree with her, but now it seemed like she was the one who was out of line. The tension was still thick in the air, but now there was a new feeling. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this situation could end without more shouting or hurtful words. The park was quiet, but it wasn't a tense silence anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are listening, really listening, and waiting to see what will happen next. Miss Karen opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, Jenna spoke again. "It's not too late to stop," she said softly. "You don't have to keep being angry. Just let it go." For a moment, Miss Karen just stood there, her mouth open, and it looked like she might start shouting again. But then, something changed. Her shoulders slumped, and she glanced around at the faces watching her. For the first time, she seemed to realize just how many people were there, and how they were looking at her, not with fear, but with disappointment. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what she would do. Would she lash out again, or would she finally walk away? No one could have guessed that this moment was only the beginning of an even bigger twist that no one saw coming. Just as it seemed the conflict had come to an end, with Miss Karen walking away and the park slowly returning to its usual peaceful buzz, something unexpected happened. The sun was still shining brightly, and people were beginning to relax, but a voice from the edge of the gathering crowd called out, breaking the momentary calm. "Karen, is that you?" It was an elderly man, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. His voice was warm and gentle, yet there was a firmness that caught everyone's attention. The crowd turned to see him approach, and even Miss Karen, who had been retreating, stopped in her tracks. She turned around slowly, her expression shifting from irritation to a mix of surprise and confusion. It was as if she recognized the voice but didn't want to believe it. As the man got closer, it became clear he was someone who carried a sense of quiet authority. He had kind eyes and a warm smile, but his gaze was steady, almost like he could see right through everything that was happening. He stopped a few feet away from Miss Karen and tilted his head slightly. "Karen, it's been a long time," he said softly. Miss Karen's expression was unreadable. It was clear she knew him, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the ground, almost as if she was trying to avoid his gaze. "Mr. Johnson," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled gently and nodded. "That's right. I haven't seen you since you were a little girl playing in this very park." He gestured around, as if remembering a scene from years ago. "I used to see you here almost every day, always by yourself." Everyone watching was confused. Who was this man? And what did he have to do with Miss Karen? The crowd, which had begun to disperse, gathered again, sensing that something important was about to unfold. Even Jenna, who had stood up to Miss Karen earlier, was curious. She stepped closer, watching the interaction carefully. Miss Karen, still looking down, seemed lost in thought. Her harsh, angry demeanor was gone, replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. I remember, she said quietly, but that was a long time ago. Mr. Johnson nodded. Yes, it was. But I remember those days clearly. You were always so quiet, but I could see there was a lot going on inside. I used to wonder why you never played with the other kids. His tone was gentle, but his words were piercing, as if they were reaching a part of Miss Karen that had been hidden away for a long time. There was a deep, tense silence as everyone waited to see how Miss Karen would respond. She looked up, and for a moment, she seemed like a different person, lost, almost afraid. They didn't want to play with me, she said, her voice cracking slightly. They thought I was strange, and then we moved away. And I guess I just got used to being alone. The crowd was stunned. This wasn't the Miss Karen they had seen just moments ago, the one who was shouting and bullying a family. This was someone else, someone who was suddenly showing a side of herself that no one expected. Even Sam, Maya, and their kids were surprised, watching quietly as this new chapter of the story unfolded. Mr. Johnson's face softened even more. I always wondered about you, Karen, he said. I saw how lonely you were, but I never knew how to reach out. And then one day, you were just gone. He paused, letting his words sink in. But here you are, all these years later, still carrying that hurt around. It doesn't have to be that way. Miss Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, as if she was embarrassed to show any weakness. I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, but her voice was shaky, and it was clear she was struggling to hold back her emotions. Yes, you do, Mr. Johnson replied softly. You've been carrying that pain for a long time, and now it's making you lash out at people who have done nothing to hurt you. But it doesn't have to be like this, Karen. You can let it go. The park was so quiet, you could hear the wind rustling through the trees. Miss Karen, who had been so fierce and intimidating just moments ago, now looked like a frightened child. She stood there, staring at Mr. Johnson, and for a moment, it seemed like she might just walk away again, pretend none of this had happened. But then she did something no one expected. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at Sam, Maya, Jenna, and even the kids, her eyes full of regret. I shouldn't have shouted at you. I was just angry, and I don't even know why anymore. Maya felt a lump in her throat. She had been prepared to defend her family, to protect her kids, but she hadn't expected this. She stepped forward and spoke softly. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to apologize. Miss Karen looked down, her face red, but there was a hint of relief in her eyes. It was like she had been holding onto something heavy for a long time, and finally, she was letting it go. I don't know how to be better, she admitted, her voice cracking. Mr. Johnson smiled, stepping closer. It's never too late to try, Karen. You're not alone, even if it feels that way. We all need a little help sometimes. The park, which had been a place of conflict just minutes ago, now felt different. There was a sense of peace, as if the sun was shining a little brighter, the air a little warmer. People began to clap softly, not to celebrate anyone's defeat, but to acknowledge a moment of unexpected grace. Miss Karen nodded, still looking unsure, but a little lighter. Thank you, she said again, this time looking directly at Jenna, Sam, and Maya. I'll try to do better. Jenna smiled warmly. That's all anyone can ask. As the crowd began to disperse, the family returned to their picnic, feeling a sense of closure they hadn't expected. Leo and Leela, who had been so scared earlier, now looked up at their parents with bright, curious eyes. Why was that lady so sad? Leela asked softly. Maya hugged her daughter tightly. Sometimes people carry around things that hurt them, and it makes them act in ways they shouldn't, she explained gently. But it's never too late to try to be kind. The park returned to its usual hum of laughter and chatter, but those who had witnessed the confrontation left with a story they wouldn't forget. A story not just about standing up to a bully, but about the possibility of change, even in the most unlikely of people. As Miss Karen stood there, visibly emotional after her unexpected apology, the mood in the park felt different. The tension had melted away, replaced by a sense of warmth and understanding. People who had been watching, recording, or just quietly observing began to smile softly. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted, allowing the sun to shine a little brighter. The confrontation had been intense, but the resolution felt hopeful. Mr. Johnson, still standing close to Miss Karen, gently patted her shoulder. It's not easy to face the things we've carried for so long, he said, his voice soothing. But it takes a lot of courage to try and change, even if it starts with a simple apology. His words were gentle, yet they seemed to have a profound effect on her. Miss Karen, who had always been seen as tough and unapproachable, now looked almost fragile, like she was still trying to figure out who she wanted to be. Sam stepped forward, offering a nod of understanding. We appreciate your apology, and it means a lot to us, he said. Maybe next time, if you're at the park, we could all share a moment together instead of this conflict. His voice was calm, but his words carried a sense of sincerity. Maya, still holding her children, gave a small smile, adding, "You're welcome to join us if you'd like." Miss Karen's eyes softened. She hadn't expected kindness in return. She had prepared herself for more anger, more confrontation. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I've never been good at this." She waved her hand vaguely, struggling to find the right words. But it was clear that something inside her was shifting, and for the first time, she was willing to try. Jenna, who had been the first to stand up to Miss Karen, smiled brightly. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said. "The fact that you're willing to try is a big step. And if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around." Her tone was casual, but there was a warmth to it, a genuine offer of friendship. The children, who had been quietly watching, seemed to sense that things were getting better. Leo, who had been clutching his mother's hand tightly, let go and took a small step forward. "Can we still play?" he asked innocently, looking up at the adults. His simple question, asked with such sincerity, made everyone smile. Even Miss Karen, who had been fighting back tears, couldn't help but chuckle. "Yes, sweetheart," Maya said, kneeling down to his level. "You can go play. Everything's okay now." As Leo and Leela ran off to join other kids on the playground, the park started to feel like it should. A place of joy, laughter, and community. The small group of onlookers who had stayed throughout the entire incident began to disperse, some of them exchanging quiet words of approval. "I'm glad that ended well," one woman said to her friend. "It's nice to see people coming together like that." Mr. Johnson, still standing beside Miss Karen, smiled at her one last time before saying, "You're not alone, Karen. You never have to be." With those words, he turned to leave, walking slowly but confidently, as if he had accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. Miss Karen watched him go, a thoughtful expression on her face. She had spent so much of her life pushing people away, building walls to protect herself. But now, it felt like those walls were starting to crumble, and she wasn't sure what to do with the open space. Before she could overthink it, she turned to Maya and Sam. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'll try to be better. Maybe I'll come to the park again sometime." It wasn't a perfect promise, but it was a start, and that was enough. "We'd like that," Maya replied warmly. "And if you ever see us here, feel free to say hello." The day continued, and the park slowly returned to its lively, cheerful atmosphere. The confrontation that had begun with harsh words and misunderstandings had ended with something much more valuable: understanding, forgiveness, and a hint of new beginnings. As Miss Karen walked away, her steps were slower, more thoughtful. She had a lot to think about, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. Sam, Maya, Jenna, and the kids gathered their things and set up their picnic once more. As they laid out sandwiches, drinks, and toys, they couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The confrontation was over, and it hadn't ended in more conflict, but rather in an unexpected moment of reconciliation. "You know," Sam said as he took a sip of his drink, "it's amazing how things can change when people are willing to listen." Jenna nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and sometimes it just takes one person to speak up." "I'm glad I did." She glanced over at Maya, who was watching her kids play, and smiled. "You've got great kids, you know, brave and kind." "Thank you," Maya said, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "And thank you for standing up for us. I think you helped more than you realize." As they continued their picnic, the park felt like it had been restored to what it was meant to be, a place of peace, happiness, and togetherness. The small group had shared an experience that would stay with them, a reminder that even in moments of tension and misunderstanding, there is always a chance for kindness, change, and a new beginning. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Kindly subscribe if you enjoyed this tale.